Have you seen this trend on social media of dog shaming, where pet owners post photos of their pets, normally their dogs, who've done something that they shouldn't have done? Who are the pet owners out there? Two people. No, more people. Who are the people who, if you've got a dog, put your hand up. It's normally with dogs, doesn't really happen with cats. Put hands up if you've got a dog. I want you to keep your hand up if you refer to yourself as mummy or daddy in relation to the dog. Who does that? There's a few people. What is that? I would want to have a conversation. And keep your hands up if you've got like other children, like human children, and they're brothers and sisters of the dogs. Yeah, okay. Let's have a conversation about that. That's fine. There you go. You know, my parents got a dog in COVID, a cockapoo called Pebbles. They absolutely adore this dog. And it goes, like the rank of importance is Pebbles, and then the grandkids, and then they've also got a camper van, and then there's a TV, and then there's sort of me all the way down there in ranks of importance. Anyway, we're not talking about that. We're talking about dog shaming. If you're not sure what this is about, I've got some examples for you. So this one says, I ate the house sitter's false teeth. There you go. So it's great, isn't it? So let's shame them. Did something wrong, publicly shame. This one says, I puked on a napping child. Oh, that's nice, isn't it? I love this one. There's a calendar. You can have dog shaming every single day of the week if you want. I had to have my stomach pumped after eating 2 pounds of chocolate. I mean, that's just really sad, isn't it? But let's pull it on a calendar so everybody else can join in the fun of that. This is my favourite. I chewed the face off a stuffed elephant. I just love that. There you go. I mean, what else would you do? You know, your pet does something that they shouldn't do. You know, like any good parent. I mean, I'm sure we've done this with our kids when they got into mischief. Actually, we've got a camera out taking photos of them, Malachi lying in a puddle of mud, all those sort of stuff. But we do that. And the reason we do that is our culture loves it when someone messes up. Not just dogs. We love it when people mess up, especially people in prominent positions or people in a position of power. As soon as somebody does something that they're not supposed to do, and the more famous or the more powerful they are, we just jump on that and we respond to it. We have this sort of gotcha culture, and we love those gotcha moments. We love it when a politician does or says something that they shouldn't do. There's a famous politician, which I won't mention, but there seems to be a hobby for many people, oh, what's he said now? Now, you know exactly who I'm talking about at the moment, but we won't get into it because it's too political. But we love it, and then we share about it, and we post about it. Or a famous person, when they do something or say something that they shouldn't have said or shouldn't have done, within minutes, there's endless posts and endless memes about it, just highlighting the mistake they've made and ridiculing them. We love it when people in prominent positions or positions of power mess up. But closer to home, we see this happening as well. Maybe you're part of a neighborhood. Who's part of a neighborhood Facebook page? Again, a few of us. Do people's arms work? Is it too hot, or am I the only? There's a Finchampstead and Barkham Facebook page. I'm part of that. I mean, that's great light reading as well. It's full of people sometimes advertising stuff, but often complaining about things that have happened. My personal favorite post on these is to the person who posts. Have you seen those? And someone goes online and they write a post to the person who, and then they write this post about this thing that somebody has done. But obviously it's not to the person who's done it. They're letting everybody else know this heinous crime that's been committed against them so that we could all join in the bashing and pile on the abuse for that. And the worst thing is that these sort of posts get far more engagement. You know, if you look at the comments on these negative posts, there's so much more than the positive posts, which are rarer, where they're talking about something good that somebody has done. Or maybe it's a colleague at work who makes a mistake and they mess up. And how do we respond? Well, the cultural way to respond is to gossip about them, is to complain about them behind their back, obviously not to their face. The cultural response is to talk about all the things that they've done wrong and highlight all their other mistakes. It's because, we're part of this gotcha generation. We are obsessed with catching people out, with exposing their failure. We're obsessed with when somebody does something that they shouldn't do or says something that they shouldn't say. We want to make sure that everybody knows about it. And even if we're not the person doing the exposing, I'm sure there's been times when we've been part of that, or have you seen this? Or we talk about something that's that somebody else has posted. So in the midst of all of that, in the midst of that culture, in the midst of all these things that are going on, and in the midst of all these mistakes that people are making, let me ask you this question. How is that working out for us? Is the world a better place for it? Muriel, is that your phone? I mean, we've talked about this before, haven't we? Should we answer it? Can I? No, we won't do that. There you go. See, I've just done it, haven't I? I've just done a gotcha moment right there, and Jamie will hang up for you, and there you go. It's fine, we'll just keep going, that's all right. Anyway, how is that working out for us? Stop it, Jim. Someone is calling me now. Is our world a better place because of this? Is this something that we need more of? No, of course it isn't. We live in a culture, we live in a time where a slip of a tongue can end a career, where a bad photo can ruin a reputation. We have this thing called cancel culture. That's where people will boycott or write off people because of something they've said or something they've done, often without knowing the full story. Now, don't get me wrong. I think we should hold one another accountable. I think we should put people in positions of power and authority. I think we should hold them to a high standard. But this gotcha culture isn't about that. It's not about bringing out the best in people. It's actually about exposing the worst. And actually, it's often just about entertainment and making something where there sometimes isn't something there at all. Surely, there has to be a better way. And the good news is, of course, there is. We're coming into the closing stages of this series called What Our World Needs Now. And for, quite a few weeks, we've been exploring this. And the whole point of this series, or the thing when we think about what our world needs now is we all have an answer to that. We all have a response. We all have a theory. You know what? This is what our world needs now. But if we were to drill down into those things that we think our world needs now, is that really the answer? Is the world a better place if it had the things that we think the world needs? Are we better? Are the people around us better? The whole point of this series, the things we've been exploring, is this concept of what the world needs now is for Christians to be Christ-like, is for people who follow Jesus to be like Jesus. And the reason this is so amazing is actually people who don't believe that Jesus is who claims to be, people who might say, well, Jesus is just a person from history, still acknowledge how good he is. The people who don't believe that Jesus is the Son of God or divine still recognize that Jesus is good and recognize that actually the world would be a better place if people were more like Jesus. So much of the good things in our culture and our society are built upon the principles that finds its root and its origin in Jesus. He changed the course of human history. He rewrote the book on how we interact, how we act, how we react with one another. And just imagine the positive impact it would make on our world if all the Jesus followers, I think that's about 1.5 billion people, if all of those people actually were like Jesus and started living like Jesus. Just imagine the impact it'd have on our community if all of us, if all the Jesus followers in this room actually lived like Jesus and were Christ-like. The world would be better. This is what the world needs now. And the whole thing about this is, what does that actually look like? What does Christ-like look like? Well, it looks like this. A guy called Paul, who was one of the leaders of the early church, wrote this in a letter to the church in Galatia. And he says, the fruit of the Spirit is love, it's joy, it's peace, it's patience, it's kindness, it's goodness, it's faithfulness, it's gentleness, and it's self-control. And throughout this series, we've been picking each one of these words and just been diving into it to explore, well, what actually does that mean? But the point of this as we zoom out is this is what Jesus is like. Jesus is all of these things. And for us to be Christ-like, if you're a follower of Jesus and you want to be like Jesus, this is what it looks like. And Paul says this interesting thing, says the fruit of the Spirit. And that's a confusing phrase. Jesus said to his first followers when he was about to die and he knew he was coming back to life and he's going to ascend to heaven, he promised them the gift of his Spirit to be with them, to support them and strengthen them and comfort them. And so the Holy Spirit, the third person of the Trinity, Father, Son, and Spirit, is given to the people who follow Jesus. That the Spirit of God lives within us if you are a follower of Jesus. And what Paul is saying is that the fruit of the Spirit, when the Spirit is at work within us, it produces these characteristics. These things that we're exploring, they don't happen within us because we try really difficult. They happen within us because we allow the Spirit of God to be at work within us, and it produces that fruit. But there's a little bit more to it than that. It's not just, okay, I sit back and this happens. We kicked off this series by looking at something that Jesus said when he says, remain in me or abide in me. I want you to live in me. I want you to stay connected to me. And he used the metaphor of a vine and branches. And as soon as you take a branch off the vine, it withers and dies. It can't produce fruit. But when that branch stays connected into the vine, it produces fruit. And actually Jesus is saying, look, I'm the vine, you're the branches. You need to stay connected into me. Paul is saying that the fruit of the Spirit, with the fruit produces, the Spirit produces this fruit in us. And it happens by doing this. Since we live by the Spirit, because the Spirit of God is within us, if we're Jesus followers, let us keep in step with the Spirit. Let's follow him and keep up with him. And where we see his prompting and his guiding. And if you're a Jesus follower, hopefully you understand what I'm talking about, that sense within you that, I sense that God is asking me or expecting me or calling me to do something. Paul says, keep up with that. You've got to actually apply that. You've got to do something with that. You can be a follower of Jesus and have that prompting and do nothing with it. That is not keeping up with the Spirit. That is not abiding in Jesus. And that will not produce the fruit of the Spirit that we're talking about. So we've explored all of those. You can catch up on the ones that you've missed on our YouTube channel, on the hub. Just click Sunday's message and you can listen back or watch back to all of those messages. But the thing that we're going to look at today is a word, it's a characteristic that is often misunderstood, especially in our gotcha-obsessed culture. And it's this one, gentleness. And we're going to do this by flicking over the page in this letter in Galatians to the next chapter. So we've been looking at chapter 5, the fruit of the Spirit is in there. We're going to flick over the page to the start of chapter 6. But it's important to recognize that what we're doing there, when we're looking at these chapters and verses, we need to remember that these were things that were added in later on. We put chapters, or people put chapters in and they put verses into these letters or these books in the Bible to help us navigate them. It's a big book, or some of the letters are really big, so you can actually find that verse and be able to navigate to it. Paul didn't do that. Paul didn't start his letter and do chapter 1, verse 1, chapter 1, verse 2. He just wrote this letter to the church in Galatia, and we've put these things in later on. So when we flick over to chapter 6, sometimes we think, okay, we're starting a new thing, we're starting a new theme. But that's not what was going on in Paul's mind. This is part of this same letter. So the stuff we're going to read is just going to carry on the flow from Paul talking about the fruit of the Spirit and walking in step with it. And it says this: brothers and sisters, if someone is caught in a sin, you who live by the Spirit, and we'll come to what comes next in a moment. So this is exactly what we've been talking about. What is it that we do when somebody messes up? What do we do when we discover or we catch somebody doing something that they shouldn't do? And there's this religious word, sin, in there that we use. Now, that needs some unpacking. This word's got so much baggage attached to it. And we could spend ages talking about this word. Basically, the Greek and the Hebrew words for sin, that's the language that the Bible was originally written in, are both translated to something along the lines of missing the mark. And it's a word that you would use for like an archer. When an archer is aiming for their target and they miss their target, they've sinned. They've missed their mark. They've missed what they're aiming for. So that's what sin is. Sin is missing the mark. Now, that leads us on to the next question of, well, what mark or who sets the mark? And I think, if we look at Jesus, if we look at the things that Jesus said and we looked at the things that Jesus did, he helps us understand what is sin about? What is a definition of sin? And, this is what I think Jesus says. Sin is anything we do that harms us or somebody else. So when someone is caught in a sin, when somebody is doing something that's harmful to them or doing something that's harmful to somebody else, what do we do? Those who live by the Spirit, what is it that we're required to? And Paul is talking to Jesus followers. He's talking to people who are full of the Spirit, who walk in step with the Spirit. He's talking to people who abide in Jesus. And he says, so what do you do when you see somebody doing something they shouldn't do, or you become aware of somebody doing something that they shouldn't do? What is it that you do? How do you respond? Is it like this? You should expose that person publicly. You should post about it on social media so that everybody knows. You should gossip about it to everybody so that everybody knows. Is that right? Well, that doesn't quite sound right to me. So maybe it's something like this. You should rebuke that person quickly. You should tell them that they've messed out. You should point out their fault, because after all, they need to know that what they have done is wrong, and they need to be told that. And that still doesn't sound quite right to me. So how about this? You should condemn that person harshly. Along with telling them off, should we write them off? And, the response to this, actually, Paul doesn't say any of those things. When we find somebody or we become aware of somebody who's doing something that they shouldn't do or says something they shouldn't do, those of us who live by the Spirit, our job isn't to publicly shame them. Our job isn't to point out all of their mistakes, and say, oh, you messed up here, and by the way, do you remember all those other things that you did? Our job isn't to write them off. That's not what Paul is asking us to do. That's not what those who live by the Spirit do. But let's just pause there for a moment, because actually, let's be honest with ourselves. We do. We do those things. Just think about that. Be honest with yourself. When was the last time you publicly shamed somebody? You probably wouldn't have put that label on it, but when was the last time you sort of joined in the gossiping about something that somebody has done? When was the last time you pointed out all the mistakes that they made and highlighted, this is what you've done wrong, and you did this wrong, and you did that wrong? When was the last time you just wrote them off? Oh, they always do that. They always mess up there. We do these things, and the thing we have to think about is, how is that working out for us? Is the world a better place because of that? Are we better because of that? Are they better because of that? The answer often is no. Did this help in the situation? See, what Paul goes on to share is what's expected for Jesus followers. He says, those of you who live by the Spirit. So if that's you, if you would class yourself as a follower of Jesus, what Paul goes on to say is what is expected of you. This is what you've signed up for. And if that's not you, if you're still someone who's curious about faith, you're still figuring it out, or you're not sure Jesus is who he claims to be, you don't have to do this. You're under no compulsion or obligation to do what Paul says here. But that doesn't mean that you can't give it a go. Because I think, actually, if we did what Paul says next, the world will be a better place. We will be better people, and the people around us will be better as well. This is what Paul says. Brothers and sisters, if someone is caught in a sin, you who live by the Spirit should restore that person gently. This is the opposite of our gotcha culture. Jesus followers, people who are full of the Spirit, that our focus shouldn't be on condemnation. It should be on restoration. It should be about, helping to make them right and the situation right. And how we do this differs depending on the situation or the circumstances of what's happening. But the key about this is to think about our end goal. Do we want to end in condemnation, or do we want to end in restoration? Do we want to point out all their faults and write them off, or do we want to restore them and actually help point them back to who they are and to who Jesus is? Let's go back to the verse. See, Paul says, brothers and sisters, if someone is caught in a sin, and that whole our interpretation of that word actually says a lot about what we're thinking and our approach. Because our gotcha culture sort of says, I caught you, whereas restoration culture sort of sees that word caught differently. This is not about catching people out, it's about helping people out. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, do we want to catch people, or do we want to catch people? And how we interpret that word is really important. To be caught means to be trapped. We all do things that we know we shouldn't do. We all say things that we all know we shouldn't say. And, Scripture elsewhere in the New Testament talks about sin as something that easily entangles, it ensnares us, it catches us, it makes us trapped. What do we do when we find somebody that is caught? Do we want to use a net to catch them and to trap them, or do we want to use a net to catch them and to stop them from falling? And I suppose the answer to that question is, how do we want to be caught? When it's us in this situation, when we've done something that we shouldn't have done, when we've said something we shouldn't have said, when we've messed up, how do we want to be caught? You see, our gotcha culture says, you've been caught, let's make sure everyone else knows. Whereas the Jesus culture says, I see you're caught, let me help you get free. See, this is about condemnation, but this is about restoration. I see that you're caught. I see that you're trapped. Let me help you get free. And that's what Paul is saying. He's encouraging us. He's instructing us to restore the person. But how do we do that? Well, let's go back to the verse. We should restore that person gently. And this is where we get to this characteristic of the fruit of the Spirit, this characteristic of Jesus, of gentleness. And we have to pause here because let's be honest, this word is so misunderstood. And again, if we're honest, this is a characteristic that most of us are not clamoring for. Just think about it. When people describe you, how far up the list do you want gentleness to be? You know, when somebody's talking about you and they're introducing you, oh, this is so-and-so, oh, you'd love them, they are so gentle. Is that most of us, actually, if we're really honest, we don't want to be described of those things because we picture, what do you picture when you picture the word gentleness? Who do you picture when you picture the word gentleness? You know, we associate it with words like soft or fabric softener. Dan, who's leading the band, asked him that earlier. I said, what do you think about when you hear the word gentleness? He says, well, fabric softener. I think, oh, well, that's nice. I asked AI to create an image of gentleness for me, and it created this image. Isn't it beautiful? It's lovely. It's just so soft and snuggly. It's lovely, but I don't want to be described as that. Actually, if I'm honest, I'd rather be associated with words of strength and power. Gentleness has an air of weakness about it, but this is where this word is so misunderstood. And actually, I'd like to suggest that this is exactly what we want to be described for. You know, we think it's about softness and we think it's about weakness, and we want to be about strength and power. Maybe that's a male thing, but I'm sure it's not just a gender thing at all. But think about that for a moment. Put yourself on the operating table. You know, do you want a strong surgeon or a gentle one? You know, do you want a strong surgeon or a calm and controlled one? You know, as they open up your brain and, sticking sharp objects inside. Do you want somebody who's going to use calm and controlled, who's going to use small and precise, gentle movements as they stick sharp objects in your brain? You don't want a strong surgeon. You want a gentle one. Or what about a bomb disposal expert? Do you want a powerful one or a gentle one? You know, you don't want somebody crashing in on the scene and rough handling that device that could go off in any minute and blow up the whole building or the whole block. You want somebody who's controlled. You want somebody who knows what they're doing, who's careful, who again uses precise, gentle movements. Or what about somebody who's holding your baby? Do you want a powerful person or a gentle person? This is a picture of me holding Leah's hand when she was born. She was tiny. And you want to know what gentleness looks like? Try changing a nappy in an incubator when somebody's wired up to the national grid. I mean, that is really difficult. But when somebody holds your child, you don't want them to use their strength. You want them to be gentle and controlled. You want somebody who uses their strength appropriately. And those of you who've got you've got younger kids and older kids, when the older sibling holds their younger sibling for the first time, and you gently and carefully place them in their lap and they're holding onto them, there's a word that I'm sure most of us, if not all of us, have said as the older sibling holds onto them. We say gentle. Because we know that they've got more strength, that they've got more power, and if they don't use that strength appropriately, they could hurt and damage that baby. See, gentleness isn't softness. Gentleness isn't weakness. Gentleness isn't the absence of strength. Gentleness is strength under control. You cannot have gentleness without strength. And I absolutely love this definition of gentleness because it shows me what God is like. God is gentle with us. God doesn't flex his muscles and show us the things that he could do. God treats us with gentleness. He treats us with dignity. He treats us with respect. And, again, if you're a Jesus follower, I'm sure there's been those moments in your life when you've been aware of that gentle presence of God, how God treats you gently. For me, it's in times of worship when I become aware of the presence of God around me, and I stand in awe and wonder as God draws close to me. I can't quite get my head around that, but the creator of the universe walks close to me, and I walk away unharmed, but more than that, uplifted. How is that possible? Well, because God is gentle. He uses his strength and he uses his power in a controlled way. He doesn't just flex his muscles and steams in. Or when I face difficulties in life and life is challenging, there's those moments when God draws near. And his gentleness comforts me and helps me, and it motivates me, and it inspires me to keep going, to keep doing whatever it is I need to do to get through this thing or this difficult season of life. I also see his gentleness in those times when I mess up. And again, God doesn't come in his power and point out all my faults and say, well, Chris, look what you did here, and you did that there and there and there. He gently restores me and helps me. He helps me own up to my mistake. He helps me not, make excuses for it, but to acknowledge, hands up, I did that, I said that, I thought that, I've messed up. And he gently helps me and restores me in those situations. God is gentleness, and he shows his strength under control. It's exactly what God is like. But what about us? How do we use our strength? How do we use our power? Going back to the thing that we're talking about, what does gentleness look like when people mess up? Well, again, let's go back to this verse. Brothers and sisters, if someone is caught in a sin, you who live by the Spirit should restore that person gently. I hope this gets stuck in your head and you're thinking about this throughout this week. Who is the person in the position of strength in this scenario? Is it the person who's been caught in the sin, or is it the person who's caught them? Of course, it's the latter. And if gentleness is strength under control, how do we use our strength? How do we use our position to help this person who is caught, who is trapped? And actually, we can apply this to any situation of life. When you are in that position of strength, when you're in that position of power, how do you use that strength? How do you use that power? How do you use your position to help the person in front of you? It's true in any situation. It's true for parents when a child disobeys you. You are bigger and stronger than them. You are in control. You control their freedom. You control their pocket money. You control, pretty much everything there is about them. Sometimes it doesn't feel like that, but that is the truth. We are in the position of strength and power. How do we use that strength? How do we use that position when our kids mess up? Do we come down on them like a ton of bricks and crush their spirit? Or do we help gently point them in the right direction? See, gentleness in this context is about using enough authority, just enough authority to gently guide them back on track and not crush their spirit. Or what about the work colleague who makes a significant error, or the employee, you're their boss and they've messed up? You hold their career in your hands. What do? Do you publicly embarrass them? Do you write them up, or do you write them off? Or do you, gentleness says, how can I use my position? How can I use my strength and my power to help you? How do I help you learn and grow from this rather than just punish you in this situation? Or what about when you are the person who's right in an argument? I mean, I know about this a lot at home. I can only say that because Louise is upstairs working on youth, and otherwise she would just told me off. But what do you do that? You've got the facts on your side. You could prove your point. You could drive that home and you win. But the question you have to ask yourself is, do I want to be in the right, or do I want to be right with them? Gentleness says, do I want to be right or do I want to be married? And it's talking about how do I use this to actually, how do I use my strength or my position to restore rather than just prove that this was the one time that I was in the right and drive that home. This is the whole thing we're thinking about. How do I use my position? How do I use my strength? How do I use my power to help the person in front of me, especially when that person is messed up, especially when that person's in the wrong? Do we condemn them or do we restore them? And Paul doesn't stop here. He carries on. And what he says next in this same verse is a warning. He says, brothers and sisters, if someone is caught in a sin, you who live by the Spirit should restore that person gently. But watch yourselves, or you may also be tempted. Now, why does Paul say that? Well, see, when we're the person who's done the catching, when we're the person in the position of strength and power because we're not the one who's messed up, that is the point where we are most vulnerable to messing up. We need to remember that we are not better than the person we are helping. As soon as we start to think to ourselves, oh, I would never do that. How could they do that? How could they be so stupid? That's when we've lost our gentleness. Paul is telling us, you are not the hero of this story. You are just a person who still is in need of grace. We are all one bad decision away from disaster. It's a slippery slope. Just that one bad decision can lead to another decision, and quickly we can be in a whole heap of trouble. And so we need to embrace humility and grace and gentleness in these situations to recognize that, okay, the only thing that separates me from you in this situation is timing and circumstance. It could so easily be the other way round. We're all that one decision away from disaster. And it takes strength in these moments to actually choose to help when we could destroy. It takes strength in these moments to choose to restore and build up when we could choose to use that to gain credits with other people by gossiping and laughing about that. It takes strength to act gently in this situation. So I want to leave you with a challenge this week. And the challenge is to choose gentleness over that gotcha culture. We're going to get the band up as we wrap up our time, all this time together. You see, this week, you are going to be faced with opportunities to choose gotcha or gentleness. You're going to be faced with those situations where somebody says or does something that they shouldn't do, and how you respond is your choice. How you respond reflects whether you are keeping in step with the Spirit or abiding in Jesus or not. It could be kids messing up at home. It could be an argument with your husband and wife. It could be in traffic and that person cutting you up or doing something, driving in a way that's annoying you. It could be a colleague at work, could be a neighbor, it could be any situation. It could be on social media, just as you're scrolling through a feed and you see that other post that's bashing somebody else. We're faced with that choice. Am I going to lean into the gotcha culture that's around me, or am I going to lean and step into the gentleness culture that seeks restoration over condemnation? Gentleness takes far more work. Takes a lot more strength than just going with the culture around us and saying, well, there you go, let's highlight all your faults and failings and write you off. But I think this is what our world needs now, because we're surrounded by people who mess up, and it's not just normal people. Well, we're all normal people, but people in prominent positions mess up all the time, and we could just jump on the bandwagon to write them off, or our neighbors or our colleagues or whoever it is. Or we could choose that harder path, that path that needs strength, to actually choose to, how do I help? How do I make this person better in this situation, which in turn makes me better, which in turn makes the world better? How can I actively seek restoration? This is not about just letting people get away with it. It's about helping to restore people and make things right. So as ever, as we've done throughout this series, we've got a little response, prayer response for us. I'm going to invite you to stand to your feet, if that's all right. And in a moment, we're going to say this out loud. But just before we do that, we'll just put a little bit of music on. Where is this going to be difficult for you? Who are the people where you recognize it's going to be a challenge for you to have a posture of gentleness? Just flick through your diary mentally in your head. Think about those places you're going to be, and where is it that you really need to pray this prayer. Let me just give you a moment to think about that. See, this is a choice that we make in all situations, but there's touch points, there's flash points for us where it's difficult. And that's where we need the Spirit to be at work within us to produce the fruit of gentleness, because we can't do that by ourselves. So in a minute, we're going to pray this out loud once, and I invite you to pray it like you really mean it. Invite God into your heart and lean into the Spirit of God that's at work within you if you're a follower of Jesus. And let's pray this out loud together. Heavenly Father, help me to have a posture of gentleness to those around me. Amen.